Hi, and thank you for joining me for another short lecture. And friends, today I'm going to cover a topic that affects all Jews. Not to mention that this is one of the many reasons that Torah, true Judaism today, looks backwards and ridiculous. And not just to secular, but also to true Torah scholars who are proficient, not just in the halakha, but the halachic process as well. So I dedicate this lecture to the countless Torah Jews who have left the Orthodox world, mainly because of ascetic stringencies like this one that have no actual practical basis in Torah Shebaal Peh. And friends, the topic I'm going to speak on tonight is Kol Isha on the prohibition of women singing. And please, I ask you to listen to the full lecture before commenting. And please also remember that if you do comment on any one of my lectures, you should not say that my rabbi teaches or some later rabbi wrote some opinion somewhere. No, friends, because this is not how Jewish law works or how Jewish law is set. But rather, let me remind you of the rules of the game. And that's that if the sources do not stem from Torah or from a Mishnaic source, they are not only not binding on Israel and do not become halakha, but they are also not to be labeled in any way Judaism. And most important of all, they do not represent our Creator's will. In other words, our basis for everything is Torah, and its practical interpretation is only left to the court, which we reverently refer to as Chazal. And again, friends, the topic on the table tonight is the issue of Kol Isha, the idea that it is forbidden for men to hear a woman sing. An idea that also includes not hearing women pray, recite passages in Torah, or even sing Zmirot. But the most shocking thing of all is that most people do not know why. And this is where I come in. Now, I hope you do not think I'm making this video because I support the feminist Jewish effort in some way tearing down religious social norms between men and women, because those who've seen my videos in the past know that my only goal is to stand and teach according to Jewish law, no matter which group I happen to offend or praise. And friends, I can assure you that this lecture tonight is no different. So, to begin, the notion of Kol Isha is derived from a few places in Shas. One of those places appears in Masechet Brachot, Chaf Daled Amud Aleph, which asks the question that if a person or can a person recite Kriyat Shema in the presence of nakedness? And the answer is unequivocally no. And not just others' nakedness, but even one's own. And then it goes on into the discussion to try to explain what constitutes nakedness or erva according to halakha. Actually, this is also the source where we learn that a woman's hair is considered an erva. But regardless, towards the end of the sugya, we have Rav Shmuel stating, Kol Isha erva, that even a woman's voice constitutes nakedness or an erva. He then quotes a pasuk in Shir Hashirim to justify his statement. Now, this is where most begin when trying to understand the inyan of Kol Isha erva. So this is where we will begin also. And from the outset, with just a simple glance regarding all the different statements made regarding what constitutes sensual nakedness, erva, they never really referred having anything to do with the recitation of Shema. In other words, it seems that all these statements were just being mentioned, but were never really tied halachically with, again, Kriyat Shema. So no conclusion was ever really made of what the final din was. I mean, it began with Shema, and then the discussion went somewhere else. And even when Rav Shmuel stated Kol Isha erva, he never distinguishes between what this actually means or covers. I mean, just with that statement alone, it sounds like it's a woman's voice stam. In other words, even speaking with a woman, any woman would be forbidden, which you should not be surprised to hear is the way that the majority of poskim today understand it to mean, with slight modifications. Also, you must also know that Kol Isha erva is not deraita, but completely derabanan, if even that. Because as you know, every one of the statements made regarding what's an erva were made by Amoraim, men who did not necessarily have smicha themselves, and who would only be able to recover, publicize, or clarify a pre-existent ruling and not create one for themselves. In other words, we assume they're quoting Tanaic sources that we no longer have with us. And friends, why is it important to know whether it's a Torah prohibition or a rabbinic prohibition? Well, easy, because of the principle of Safek de Rabbanan lehakel. In other words, the rule is that if we ever have a doubt or a question on a rabbinic ruling, we are to take the lenient view. And regarding Torah rulings, we have to take the stricter one. And unfortunately, this is a principle that, with the great influx of asceticism in the Jewish world, is virtually non-existent today. But anyways, in the same sugya, it says that Rav Yitzchak states, Tefach be'isha erva, that even a hand's breadth size, which is between 3 to 10 inches of a woman's body, constitutes an erva, nakedness, and not only a tefach of a woman, but Rav Sheshet states that even looking at the little finger of a woman, it is forbidden to do so, which opens up a completely different dimension to the statements previously said. And I know that on the outset, all these statements seem a little confusing, so let me just break them down a little clearer, right? What this page in the Gemara is doing is giving you the halachic parameters for what is considered both physically and halachically nakedness or sensual nakedness. However, there are actually 2 levels of nakedness that are being discussed here without a clear explanation. One is the plain, straightforward nakedness, and the second is a halachic preventative nakedness. In other words, one deals with the woman's actual private body parts, and the other deals with areas that can be used to arouse or encourage a forbidden relationship. Because I'm sure no one is going to agree that gazing at a woman's little finger is really equivalent to gazing at one of her private parts. No. The understanding is that if the woman was forbidden to you with what the Torah describes as one of the arayot, that even staring at her little finger could be the first step to possibly cohabitating with her. And examples of other arayot are an Isha, another man's wife, a woman who's a nida, a non-Jewish woman, or even a relative that one is not allowed to marry. I mean, all these appear in Vayikra and Parashat Charemot, which is why the issue regarding the statements of Kol Be'isha Erva, that even the voice of a woman is nakedness, was understood to be referring to the call of an erva. Now, it's a little confusing because erva is actually the singular for arayot. The notion of arayot is always tied in with Sarabia, with forbidden relationships, because arayot, again, are the women who are forbidden to us. But again, friends, the singular of arayot is erva, literally nakedness. In other words, in the light of these statements, this must only apply to someone who is forbidden for one to cohabit with, i.e. one of the arayot. And virtually all my friends of the early poskim understood Kol Ba'isha Erva to mean that the call of an erva was asur, was itself an erva. And the notion of Tefach Ba'isha Erva, the looking at a tefach of a woman, is only forbidden in regards to an erva, not to a regular woman. I know it's a little complicated. And if not, one would have to say that not only is it forbidden for a man to look at a woman, let's say he's thinking of marrying, who is permitted to him, but really it would be a cry that all women should walk around in burqas. And here, regarding Tefach B'Isha Erva, we see that Rashi also states that this is only referring to one of the arayot. Also the Rambam, the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, and the majority of poskim of that time held this way. And also, friends, we must not forget the reason that Rav Shmuel gave for considering Kol Ba'isha and Erva, which was the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, right? Which states, Ki kolech harev umarech naveh, for sweet is your voice and your countenance is comely. And to really understand what this is leading us to, just read the previous pasuk, which states, Kumilach ra'iti yafati ulchilach. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. In other words, this here is referring to provocative talk, the speech that seduces, not just the voice of a woman. And this is what Rav Shmuel was getting at. And it's interesting that this is exactly how the Rambam in Surabia explained Kol Ba'isha Erva, on how he understood it as Kol ha'erva, literally. Kol Ba'isha Erva asur, that it's the voice of an erva that's asur, that's forbidden. Not that the voice of a woman is an erva. In other words, this teaches us that the call of an erva, i.e. one of the women that the Torah in Vayikra prohibits us to be with, prohibits us to cohabit with, that it is asur to listen to that voice, and only asur if it's provocative or seductive. Not in any way saying that just listening to the voice of a woman is prohibited, because again, this would prohibit the listening of any female voice, which is why the Rambam never mentions this prohibition in Hilchot Kriyat Shema, but like we said, only in a Serebia. And friends, again, the Rambam is not alone here, but the Rif, the Rosh, the Tor, and even the Shulchan Aruch held that this was the din. The only later innovation was that the Shulchan Aruch, although acknowledging the actual din, acknowledging the actual halacha, said that his opinion was more like the Rashba, that people should be strict and also not recite Kriyat Shema while listening to a woman's voice. In other words, it was a chumrah and unnecessary stringency that has made it a prohibition in religious life and as unfortunately the norm today. And I know you're probably wondering, when is the sugya going to mention singing? Well, friends, the truth is that it is never going to mention singing, mainly because the notion of a kol zemer, the voices or the singing voices of women, is a much, much later innovation. In other words, it appears nowhere in the source text. Actually, it was only much, much later because any rational person would realize that this would make it impossible to ever daven or ever function in normal society. These poskim then said that the kol here must be referring to a kol zemer, a singing voice, which then created the prohibition we have today of not listening to any woman sing. And you're probably wondering, why is the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh so important regarding the actual understanding of this inyan? Well, because in the Torah world, they specifically act as the guardians of the final understanding of Chazal. In other words, we know that even the Shulchan Aruch claim to base all of its rulings on either one of these three. Now, there was actually one who did disagree, a real dat yachid in this area, which was Rabbi Hananel, who believed that the kol that's referred to in Masechet Barachot was an erva stam. So, yes, for those who choose to be strict on themselves, they surely at least have a Rishon who thought that this was the actual din. But what they don't have the right to do is to teach this lone opinion as the actual halacha, when Rabbi Hananel's understanding was only understood as a chumrah among Rishonim. But friends, also, like I told you, that Masechet Barachot was not the only place that explains Kol Beish Erva. But really, we see that in the Yerushalmi, it really seals the final interpretation of what Kol Beish Erva really means, in such a way as to almost counter anyone who learns this to mean that the call of a woman is an erva stam, or if it's a call of an erva, again, the seductive voice of a woman who's forbidden to you. So we see the Yerushalmi in Chala, Perek Bet, Chalacha Dalet, states that a woman is allowed to say the bracha in separating Chala, even if she's naked, as long as she's sitting down, because by sitting down she can cover up the part that we consider an erva. So in this Mishnah, the Yerushalmi explains that this is true regarding her reciting the bracha over separating Chala. But to look at her even clothed, to look at her anywhere, is forbidden, as we have learned that a person who looks at even her heel is like one who looks at the house of her womb. And a person who looks at the house of her womb is like one who slept with her. And then, friends, it goes on to say that Rav Shmuel said, Kol be'isha erva, that a voice of a woman is an erva. Why? Because it states in Yirmiyahu, V'haya mikol snuta, that the land was defiled from the sound of her harlotry or sluttiness. Stating what? Stating that the sound that we consider an erva is only a kol snuta, meaning a seductive word or seductive speech, which when dealing with an erva would be referred to us as harlotry or improper seductive speech. Because again, if someone would dare to say that the kol of an Isha is an erva stam, that the voice of a woman is forbidden in general, this would mean that we are forbidden even today from hearing the voice of any woman, all women. Are you with me, my friends? Not to mention that in Sefer Shoftim, in Perek Hey, the first pasuk in the book of Judges, in chapter 5, the first verse, it states that Devorah, the prophetess, sang a song of praise to Hashem together with Barak, the son of Avinoam. And again, this could not have been possible if her voice was forbidden to be heard. And also, friends, to be fair, there are some groups like the Yekis, the German Jews, who follow the practice even today of allowing women to sing Zmirot at the Shabbos table if men are singing along with them. right? And I think Rabbi Yosef held the same way. And they allow this even while following the Ashkenazi practice of considering all women singing to be forbidden because of the halachic principle that two voices drown out each other. And they consider the woman's voice at that point as indistinguishable from the man's voice. Again, they only allow this if men and women are singing together. And also some cite Megillah Chaf Gimel that states that the reason women are forbidden to receive aliyot to the Torah is because of kavod hasibor, a honor, or in this case lack of honor, that is shown to the congregation. Which, if you would think that kol beish erva meant that a woman's voice is forbidden to be heard, why didn't the Gemara here use this as an example instead? And for those, my friends, who hold like the Mishnah Berurah, who understand it to mean a singing voice stam, they, the students of the Chafetz Chaim, then go as far as to acknowledge how difficult it would ever be to daven in this manner if anyone was ever to take this halakha seriously. And then it goes as far as to give their students permission to break this supposed halakha in order to be able to religiously function in society. So, what is this saying? That because of their silly instinct to seem more strict than 90% of the Rishonim, and one could probably assume a Chazal as well, they conclude that we must break their strawman halakha, this strawman halakha they created, telling us that they have now created a new door for future ascetics to walk through, for future ascetics to aspire to, which will ultimately end up banning all female speech under the guise of looking more pious than their peers. And this, friends, is how radicalized groups are formed. And my greatest proof for this is virtually everyone listening to this shiur tonight that thought that the prohibition of women singing was the actual halakha, when it was not, assuming that this is what the Creator's will was all along, something that He Himself in some way sanctioned. Think about that the next time women at religious gatherings, be it a Shabbos table or a wedding, are told to stay quiet and not sing. Or when you hear the footsteps made by Orthodox males as they walk out of any venue when female voices begin singing. Or even when fathers are not allowed to visit their daughters in a school play because their friends may be singing. Or when men are forced to listen to children sing in some way mimicking female voices, which is why this whole yeshiva boys choir, Miami boys choir movement has taken off. Okay, anyways, friends, let me stay on the topic without getting so animated. Anyways, the last verse I need to mention before closing the shiur regarding kol beish erva is found in Masechet Kiddushin, regarding the notion of shelat shalom to an eshet ish, literally sending a message of how are you to someone else's wife. So here it states that the reason this is asur is because of kol beish erva. Now, it's not clear here, but it seems that this is just an extension of the prohibition that we have of engaging in any extensive speech with women, of men engaging in extensive speech with women. And in this case, specifically a married woman. In other words, shelat shalom back then is not the same as someone saying hi or how are you today, but it was an actual, almost like a progress report about the person's well-being. But this in no way could mean that it was forbidden to speak to women stam, because we have many instances all over Talmudic literature that has Chazal speaking to women. So friends, what is the final halakha? Well, by 90% of all poskim, you are not only allowed to recite Kriyas Shema in the presence of any woman who's not seductively speaking to you, but you are allowed to listen to the voice, which would include the singing voice of any woman who's not seductively speaking to you. Not to mention that even if the woman was seductively speaking to you, and she was halachically permitted to be with you, then it also wouldn't be an issue either. This, my friends, is the din. This is the halacha, and there is no running away from it. There is no changing it, no matter what some ascetic later authority would like to thrust on your shoulders. And friends, everything I'm sharing with you tonight really took no great insight on my part. Actually, it takes something special not to understand it in this way, and worse, to teach it as what it is not, which is a prohibition against hearing women sing. And what does this mean to all those who persist in teaching it in such a manner? Friends, what it means is that you are ignorant of the halachic process and should not be given the opportunity to influence others in the Torah world. And friends, if you're interested in learning more about Torah Judaism, or possibly converting to Judaism, which if you're serious about Torah, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do, please visit torahjudaism.org. Thank you.